In this video, we will learn all about if statements. So I have the Python shell on the left, and I have a module or a script that I am writing here on the right. And I have a equals 10. And so I'm going to write an if statement. Type if a, and percentage sign means modulus, 2 equals 0. Then I want it to print a is even. Okay, so let's dissect this. If the remainder of a divided by 2 is equal to 0, then print a is even. So the 2 equal sign stands for is equal to, is the number that's on the left equal to the number that is on the right. So for instance, 5 is equal to 10 would be not true because 5 does not equal 10. So now to do not equals, you would do a exclamation mark. Well, we're going to get to that in a little bit, but just for right now, if the modulus of 2 is equal to 0, then I want to print a is even. So I'm going to save it, run this, and a is even. So what an if statement does is it will only do the things in here if this condition is true. Okay. So for instance, if I would have put say 11 here, so it's not an even number, and I press F5, notice that it does not print anything out. Okay. And that's because it will only do this code in here if it is a true statement. Now you can also do if not. So if the condition is not true, if this condition here is not true, then you want this to happen. Okay. So in this case, if I run F5, it's going to print a is, well, in this case, we should do a is odd. Okay, because whenever this statement is not true, then a is odd. So if we run F5, then you see a is odd. Okay, now another way you can do this is you can delete that part, and you can do the exclamation part, and that says exactly the same thing. So if I were to copy this, and I would say if not, I would make this equals to, then you'll see that it's going to print a is odd because it's going to do this one, and then it's going to do this one. If this is not true, or if this is true. So you can see each portion is a new logical value, I guess you can say. Okay, so let's move along. You can also do multiple statements on a single line. If a is equal to 10, let's say, or a is equal to 21, be sure you do a full colon, print a is 10 or 21. Because in this condition, you're saying, is this part true, or is this part true? And if either one of these two conditions are true, then it's going to do this line right here. So a could be 10 or a could be 21. In either case, it's going to print this line out. So right now, if I were to run this, nothing happens because a is neither 10 or 21. So, but if I press, let's do 21, in this case, you run and you say a is 10 or it's 21. Okay, so you can do multiple statements in a single line. Now another thing you could do is you could say, if not, and you can use parentheses to group statements together. A modulus 3 equal to 0, or a modulus 5 equal to 0. Then you do a colon, say print a is not divisible by 3 or 5. Okay, so in this condition, what you're saying is if not, so if this, what's in this parentheses is not true, then Python's going to print a is not divisible by 3 or 5. So this is the modulus, so is it divisible by 3 or is it divisible by 5? In either case, it's going to print this out. Okay? So that's where you can do multiple statements. You can group statements by parentheses. That works. The next thing you can do is you can use if else. Okay, so let's look at that. Say if a modulus 2 is equal to 0, so if it's even, then print a is even. Then you can backspace because you want to be aligned with if. Else, print a is odd. Okay, so in this case, it's going to do one thing if this condition is true. And if it's not true, then it's going to do this other thing. Okay, so let's do 20. So it's an even number. If I press F5, you can see A is even. Now if I make this 21, it's not going to do this first statement, it's going to do the second statement. And you can see that A is odd. So if else, okay? And you know that you've typed it right because the word is going to turn orange. If it doesn't turn orange, then that's a problem. Another thing is you might need to make sure that these are indented. And everything that is that has a tab indentation is going to be done in this condition. So if I were to have a plus 5, or if I were to do this, a equals a plus 5, x equals 10, it's going to do all of these things in addition to this line here. But they all have to be indented. Another way of doing this is you can say if a is, or if a is even, if a divided by 2 has a remainder of 0, and a is greater than 5, then you would say a is even and greater than 5. So both of these conditions have to be met in order for it to print this. Now in the else statement, all I know is that if it didn't pass this test, then I don't really know if that number didn't pass because, or wasn't true because it's not even, or is it not true because it's actually less than 5. So I'd have to say either a is odd or not less than 5. Or we say, or less than 5. Sorry. So either a is, so if this condition is not true, either a is odd or a is less than 5. So if I were to save this, and if I were to press F5, notice that either a is odd or less than 5, because in this case 21 is not less than 5. If I were to do 6, okay, right. A is even and greater than 5. Okay, so if I were to do 4, then either a is odd or it's less than 5. We don't know which one it is because all we know is these two conditions are not met. We don't know which condition was not met. Okay, but you can make it so that you do know which condition is met. And that would be, in this case, you would need to use else if, or in this, the way they write is elif. So that's short for else if. So ELIF. And that provides another condition. So you would do a greater than 5. So in here you would say a is odd and greater than 5. How is it that I know that a is odd? If it's greater than 5, then the only condition it didn't meet is that it wasn't even, so then it must be odd. Okay. The next thing you can do is you do elif a modulus 2 equals 0. A is even and not greater than 5. Because if it didn't do this one, then we know that it's either not even or it's not greater than 5. In this case, we know that it's greater than 5, so it must be odd. And here we know that it's even, and it didn't pass this statement, so the only other possibility is it must be odd, or it must be greater than 5. And then else is going to catch everything else that didn't fit in the above categories. There's only one other condition that would occur. A is odd and not greater than 5. So there's only 4 possibilities that could occur. Either A is even and greater than 5, or A is odd and greater than 5, or A is even and not greater than 5, or A is odd and not greater than 5. Okay. Now we know the last case, it must be odd because it didn't fit this criteria, and it didn't fit this criteria, or it didn't fit this criteria. So the only criteria left is that A is odd and not greater than 5. Okay, so we have A equals 4. We know it's not greater than 5, but it is even. So it's not going to fit here, it's not going to fit here, it's only going to apply there. Only going to apply in this case. Okay, so we should see A is even and not greater than 5. A is even and not greater than 5. And if we did 11, A is odd and greater than 5. So in this case, we have created this kind of filter to filter out which of these conditions is true. And we can do a series of operations on that number based upon those conditions. Okay, this can get kind of complicated with all these different if and then statements, and sometimes your criteria are somewhat complicated. So one thing you can do is you can create Boolean variables, and then feed that into the if and else if statements. So we can do BTW equals A greater than, 20 and A less than 50. So what this means is A has to be between 20 and 50. It has to be greater than, A has to be greater than 20, and A has to be less than 50. So in this case, it actually wouldn't be true if I put it in 25. It would fit in between 20 and 50, so that would be a true statement. The other thing, we can create a new variable. div equals not A modulus 3 equals 0, or A modulus 5 or A modulus 7 equals 0. Okay, so what this next one is going to do is div is going to be true if A is not divisible by 3, by 5, or by 7. And then we can feed that through into a if statement. You can say if btw and div, then print let's do elif btw. Basically, I'm creating the same kind of series as before. Print b, just something quick so that I can elif div. So I do a colon, print c, else, print d. So all this will do is if both btw and div are true, then it's going to print a. If only btw is true, then it's going to print b. If only div is true, then it's going to print c, else print d. So you can see how this is a lot cleaner if you have complicated criteria, or else you would have to add this in here, add this in here, put it in here. I mean, this gets just really complicated. You see, and this can be really confusing to read if you're trying to look at someone's code and trying to understand what in the world they're trying to do here. And you might miss a parentheses. You might not type in these operators properly. So it's a lot easier, just doing Control Z, to just do it this way if you have a lot of complicated criteria. And so the next thing we're going to talk about is doing for loops. So you can add if statements in the for loop, and I would say that's the most common way of doing an if statement, is to do it while you're have an if statement while you're iterating through an object. So you got a variable here, a list of 6 values, and we're going to do for I in B. So for every item in B, if I is divisible by 2, then print string I is even, else print is odd. And of course in strings you can just use a plus sign to attach or to add on a new string. So this will convert this into a string. It can convert the item into a string, and then it will say is even or odd. So what it's going to do is it's going to iterate through this list and tell me if each one of these items is either even or odd. So if I save it and I run it, say 1 is odd, 4 is even, 2 is even, 3 is odd, 5 is odd, and 2 is even. So that is the main ways that you can use if statements. So you can use if, else, and elif. The if statement is kind of the first condition. The elif is kind of, if that's not true, then but this condition is true, then I want you to do another thing. And then else is to catch everything else that didn't fit in the above criteria. And you can, you can create Boolean variables by creating conditions and saving that into a variable, and then feeding that variable, that Boolean variable, into the if and else statement. Sometimes that cleans it up, and then you can also use it in a for loop.